So friends, as most of you know, we are marching through the Sermon on the Mount. I really think my sense in terms of Matthew's gospel anyway, just the most important part of the gospel. And so our lesson today is from Matthew 5, verses 38 to 48. But the connection here with the text that Mary just read is this. Both of these things happen up on a mountain. And in the text Mary just read, God's voice says to the disciples, listen to him. And so what we have there is kind of a reenactment or a re-giving of the law. So Moses, of course, got the law up on the mountain. And now Jesus is the new law. Jesus' teachings are the new law. So God says, listen to him. But Jesus doesn't really say anything up on that mountain. So really, I think the reference is back to this Sermon on the Mount. And so when God is saying, listen to Jesus, it's this content here that we're going through. This is what God is telling us to listen to in order to be faithful disciples. And a little spoiler, when we get to the end of the gospel, they're all again up on the mountain. And again, Jesus says when he's leaving, don't forget to do everything I taught you to do. Again, the mountain is this important place where we learn the heart of the gospel. So with that, I invite you to listen for God's word speaking to you. So Jesus said, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn also the other. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, give your coat as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you might be children of your Father in heaven. For God makes the sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters and siblings, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Friends, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So you may recall that last fall, people who were protesting ICE activity in Portland began wearing inflatable costumes. The most popular was this inflatable frog. And I thought this was a very Portland way to protest, but also a very kind of brilliant way to protest. So here's why I think it was effective. It brought people together to fight injustice while holding on to their humanity and even holding on to their joy. That doesn't always happen with protests. It reinforced that the protest was nonviolent, who can be threatened by people in all these outrageous costumes. And the image of a kind of militarized police force facing people in these outrageously silly costumes made everything that ICE did look a little bit extreme and an overreaction. So I remember seeing one video from that protest where 2 or 3 ICE officers, completely in all their gear, tackled a man in a dinosaur costume. And you just thought, how can a man in an inflatable dinosaur costume be a threat to these fully armed and armored men? So the officers looked weak, they looked out of control, they looked needlessly violent. So in today's gospel, Jesus begins, do not resist an evildoer. So this New Testament scholar who is now passed, this New Testament scholar, Walter Wink was his name, believed that Jesus was teaching us a sort of third way to deal with injustice and oppression in the gospel lesson we just heard. So a third way. So the first way, he said, would be to meet violence with violence. And so he actually argued that the Greek word translated resist here is always violent resistance. So Jesus is saying, don't violently resist an evildoer. So one way to meet oppression is to resort to violence, to defend yourself, or to defend the weak. A second way is just to shrink back and hide and hope that hiding will make you safe. But the third way that Jesus proposes here is nonviolent resistance. So you don't resort to anger or violence in the face of oppression, but you are not passive either. You don't just simply ignore it. You take on practices that challenge and shed light on the oppression. And so in his book, Walter Wink says, his book is called Jesus and Nonviolence. He has some really interesting interpretations of the beginning of the gospel lesson today. And so for Wink, this was all about Roman oppression. This wasn't just if somebody you walked by on the street slapped you in the face. That's not what he's talking about. It's all about how do we as a community deal with the oppression of the Roman Empire. So I'm not going to go into all the details, but here's sort of what he lays out in a nutshell. So if you were struck on the right cheek, this meant that you were hit by the back of someone's hand. And so it was the way a master might strike a servant, the way a Roman soldier might strike someone who wasn't doing what they asked. So the blow was not meant to seriously hurt you, but to humiliate you and put you in your place. If then you offer the other cheek, now the choice of the oppressor is to strike you with an open hand, which would be to strike you as an equal, or just to stop. So it's sort of disarming. So turning the other cheek is not passive. It's not saying I'm going to be a punching bag. It's actively resisting oppression without resorting to violence. So what about someone suing you for your shirt? So I have to admit, our translation does not make this clear, but your shirt was your undergarment. It was the part of clothing that was closest to your skin. So Jesus is saying something like this: the empire wants everything from you, even your underwear. It's kind of absurd that someone would sue you for your underwear. But if somebody sues you for your underwear, give them your outer garment as well. And actually, according to Jewish law, it was a violation of Jewish law to ever, in any kind of suit, to take someone's outer garment, because that was also what was their source of warmth at night. So if they take your underwear, take the outer garment, give them the outer garment as well, and that would leave you completely naked before the person suing you. So that would expose both the greed and the cruelty of whoever was suing you. And finally, what's this thing about walking a mile? So Roman soldiers could compel citizens to carry their equipment for 1 mile and no more. So they could just stop you on the street and say, hey, you're carrying my stuff for a mile. So this was a very public way to humiliate and dominate a population, to demonstrate that we have the power and you don't. And so this practice was deeply resented by Palestinian people then. But to walk with the soldier a second mile, well, that could get the soldier into trouble, because the soldier's now violating the law. In a strange way, it could put the soldier in this ridiculous position of saying, if you don't stop helping me, I'm going to arrest you. But more than that, it puts the power and the dignity back in the hands of the victim, right? So I'm doing this of my own free will, not because you told me to. So you can see that in each of these cases, the dignity of the oppressed one is preserved, the oppressor is exposed, but most importantly, and I think this is most important, the protester has not lost their own humanity by resorting to violence. They have not become the oppressor. Again, not unlike these inflatable costumes in Portland. Not going to resist you with violence, but we are going to expose who and what you're doing. So that's all good. And I'm kind of convinced by that. But how do you actually practice turning the other cheek when someone hits you or humiliates you? How do you allow the little bit that you have to be taken away? How do you spend 2 miles in the presence of a Roman soldier that you despise? And the answer is really quite simple. Jesus gives it to us at the end of the lesson. He says, become perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. So all you have to do is become perfect. So when Jesus says this, he's really trying to get our attention. What? Be perfect as God is perfect? So what does it mean to be perfect? Well, the verb here, or the noun here, the adjective here, can be a bit daunting, right? I have to be perfect. But really it means something more like be mature, be whole, be complete. So maybe something like this: be who you were created to be. So I want you to visualize a little baby that you've met for the very first time. And I know some of you, are grandparents for the first time and grandparents again, so you know what I'm talking about. So visualize a little baby you meet for the very first time. And they're sleeping, with their little hand up to their face. And maybe they do that thing that babies do where they get a little uncomfortable and they scrunch up their face a little bit. But then they're back at peace, sleeping again. And you see that little baby for the first time and you say to the parents, oh, she's perfect. Oh, he's perfect. Oh, they're perfect. I think this is what Jesus means when he says, be perfect. So that little baby was perfect before anything was added to them. Even before they had a name, which is the first thing you give to babies, they were already perfect. They did not need any possessions. They did not need any special talents, any special education. They did not need deep thoughts or really good ideas. They did not need to be right about anything. They did not need to be the best at anything. They were already perfect, just as they were when they came into this world. And so were all of us. So imagine that. Consider this. You could be just like that baby, enjoying an afternoon nap in perfect peace, and you would already be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. That is, of course, if you take that nap without a shred of guilt or regret. But what happens often is some voices come in to trouble our nap. They say things like this: you're not perfect, you're lazy. What are you doing here in the middle of the afternoon taking a nap? You're wasting time. You're wasting money. Think of all the things you need to do, and you're napping. So a little baby does not have that voice in their head yet, and so they can take a nap 100% guilt-free, perfectly at peace. And again, all of us were once just like that little baby. But then all sorts of things got added to us, didn't they? So some by our parents, some by our families, some by our teachers and our coaches, some by ourselves. And then we were no longer simply a little baby at peace. We had a lot to carry around, all sorts of possessions to carry around and protect. So possessions can be things like our houses, our cars, our boats, our bicycles. Possessions can be money, stocks, bonds, investments. They can be our reputation, our self-image, our profession, our accomplishments, our hard-earned skills. Possessions can be our opinions, our judgments, our beliefs, our good ideas. All those things are our possessions. And pretty soon we come to believe that our possessions are part of us and we are a part of them. So, for instance, if somebody hits your car, you feel like you have personally been hurt. If somebody attacks your reputation, you feel like somehow you've been diminished. If you lose money, you feel like you've lost a limb. And then you come to defend your possessions as if you were defending your own life. Even something as fleeting as your opinion about something, if it's challenged, you are defending your opinion as if you're defending your very life. So let's take all of that back to turn the other cheek. So Jesus teaches that we should not defend our cheek. One of our main possessions is our body, right? But we should not defend our cheek. If someone slaps it, offer the other. We should not defend our clothing, our possessions. If someone demands your underwear, give them your cloak as well. We should not defend our time and energy. If someone forces us to carry stuff for a mile, go a second mile. So you do not defend your cheek, which is your body, your clothing, which are your possessions, your time or your energy, which you value so much. So why don't you defend these things? Because detaching from these things is how you return to being like that perfect little baby that you once were. So when you are perfect in that way, you really can resist an evildoer, because what can they threaten? There's nothing left for them to threaten. But maybe the main way that a baby is perfect is that a baby does not yet judge other people as good or evil. A baby doesn't have those kinds of opinions. So, of course, a baby does pretty quickly come to love their parents more than others, but a baby doesn't yet hate a bunch of people. And so, in that way, a baby is perfect, just like God is perfect. So look at what Jesus says. For God makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good. God sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. So think of all the rain we had yesterday. It fell on every single living thing without any discrimination. It watered the lawn and it watered the weeds. That's God's love, complete non-discrimination. And this is exactly what Jesus meant when he talked about being perfect. God gives every good thing both to you and to your enemy. You breathe the same air as your enemy. You enjoy the same sunshine. You are nourished by the same rain. And so this insight is foundational for how we see and treat each other in this church, how we see and treat our neighbors, how we see and treat people of other nations, and how we see and treat even our enemies, no matter how lost any of them might be. Jesus says God makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good. God sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Can we do the same? Can we do the same? Well, sure we can. All we need to do is be perfect. And we've all been there before, and we can go there again. Thanks be to God.